The police know. That's always the most frightening part for me. The people who are supposed to protect us know the truth, and they're keeping it to themselves. The police know, your mayor knows, the governor knows. The story's so big and so constant that I doubt there's a single state or national official who hasn't been told the truth in some capacity. I know that they know because I learned the truth too. I wasn't supposed to find out. I was working for animal control at the time. That career path doesn't exactly scream top secret, does it? Anyway, I managed the calls coming into the animal control center. I relayed the information from those calls to our team members working in the field. It was a boring job, but I liked it back then. Even the odd parts I was willing to overlook. Even the parts that made my skin crawl. When I first joined the team, they explained to me that all our calls were filtered by an automated system. Press 1 if you need to report an animal sighting, and hang up and dial 911 if this is a medical emergency. I didn't question it at first. When we started getting complaints from certain callers that the automated system seemed to be intentionally keeping them in a loop, I took notice. That was when it made me uncomfortable. It made me squirm. Some of those callers described seeing impossible things, sure, but why were they all being filtered out of our system? I told myself that the machine was programmed to keep drunk callers from wasting our time. It wanted to make sure they were getting the right kind of professional help, and animal control couldn't always provide that. That explanation helped me forget. Then came the last call of my career. We got calls about a large dog roaming a residential neighborhood and howling at people through their windows. We sent someone out immediately in case that large dog was dangerous or in case it had been misidentified. We do see an occasional bear around here. At the call center for animal control, there's a secondary line for team members who need to confirm details with people like me. Sometimes they need confirmation of a reported area of interest, and sometimes they need to be reminded what type of animal they're looking for. We do, after all, get the rare instance of intentional misinformation. Sometimes a neighbor doesn't like your pet and wants to see it carried out of the neighborhood in a cage. Anyway, when the team-specific line lit up, I grabbed it immediately. The man on the other end of the phone was out of breath. He sounded scared. He wanted me to confirm a few details. We reviewed the information and decided that he was in the right area, searching for what was likely a Berner or a Pyrenees. That didn't calm him down. I realized later that he was looking for an excuse to leave the area. I wish I had given it to him that very moment. He described his investigation thus far over the phone line. He had arrived at the neighborhood and spotted a small forestry patch behind the houses. He figured the dog would be hiding there, if anywhere. The patch of woods extended back to a local mountain range. He made sure to move cautiously in case it was a bear lurking in the brush. When he got near, he said he heard the howl. It wasn't a dog's howl, and it wasn't the roar of a bear. It wasn't a mountain lion, which we hadn't seen in years, and it wasn't a wolf or a coyote. He described it as long-winded, high-pitched, and erratic. He said it crept into his ears and made his spine tingle. It made his body shake involuntarily. Just his description through the phone was enough to hitch the breath in my throat. I told him he should get out of there. Whatever it was, we needed more than one man on the case. He could wait for backup and resume the investigation then. He said it was too late, and my heart sank. He walked further into the trees, apparently. As afraid as he was, he wanted to know what kind of animal made that sound. It was so bizarre, he explained, that he thought it might be a group of kids playing a prank on their parents. He didn't think that the noise could have belonged to an actual animal. It was a computer recording playing over a speaker, he theorized. I asked him why he couldn't turn around if he knew now that it wasn't a prank after all. It was because he saw it, and it saw him. It was an animal, sort of. He said he saw it standing on two legs with its back against a tree. My mind went to bear, of course, but what he said next changed my mind. It was 10 feet tall or thereabouts. When it looked at him, it stepped forward and remained on its hind legs. It didn't wobble like a bear might, trying to keep its balance. It stood upright because that was its nature. Covered in brown fur, arms long and thicker than a fire hydrant. He said he reached for his bear mace and sprayed it into the wind. It carried toward the creature and made it run. But now he didn't know where it was. He didn't know if it was watching for him. He was afraid that if he moved or turned his back, it would attack. I made sure backup reached him as soon as possible. He made it out of the woods safely, and the incident was dismissed as a mental breakdown. When he then told the residents of the neighborhood through a local newspaper, the story was shut down by the mayor. He was made to look insane. I would have considered that to be true, especially since I never saw the beast myself. But then they came for me too. The police arrived at my place of work and forcefully escorted me off the premises. They said I was wanted in connection to the former employees' acts of disturbing the peace. I was disturbed, I told them. I was disturbed by their willingness to ignore what my teammate was saying. The look in their eyes told me that they knew. They knew that what he encountered that night was real, and they were afraid of it. That meant that the police, the mayor, and every other officer who worked to shut down that story was aware of the truth. They are aware, and they don't want us to know. It's connected to that automated system, isn't it? Calls of the weird and bizarre don't make it through, because they don't want us to know how many of these creatures are out there among us. I had purchased an old cabin in the thumb of Michigan. Beautiful place, especially in the fall when all the leaves change color. The cabin didn't have neighbors right next door. There was a good amount of space, and it sat on a really large lot. There were woods near the back of the lot, and you could see Lake Huron from the front of the place. It was pretty cheap when I had first bought the place, and I put some money into it to improve the whole cabin. It turned out really great. We would spend the whole summer up there sometimes, parts of the fall as well. The only issue we ever had was the local kids kept telling our kids about a witch who used to live in the woods behind the house. The girls especially would come home crying and telling us they'd never go into the woods again and they wanted to go home. I'd tell them all the time there was no witch. They were just trying to scare them. I'm pretty sure the town wasn't even old enough to have a history like that. Most witch stories happen around the 1600s and 1700s. The town of Port Austin, closest to our cabin, wasn't founded until much later. Though they'd calmed down, they never seemed to believe us totally. You could see it on their faces. I guess I should have paid more attention to those kids. It happened when I was hunting. I was out in the woods behind the house. There's a few things to hunt in the area: deer, rabbit, even pheasant once in a while. Hunting season had just started, and we already had stayed at the cabin for a few days. I was walking in the woods when I heard a strange whistling sound. It wasn't an animal. At first I thought it was someone messing around with me. I stopped and looked around and thought it would go away after that. It didn't. It wasn't a tune or a song, just a whistle here and there. It would go high, then low, then high again, almost as if it was calling something to it, like a dog or something. It was going to turn away anything I was trying to hunt, that was for sure, so I decided to follow it. It was those kids again, trying to mess with me or my kids. I knew it. I came upon a small clearing in the woods with an old tree stump in the middle. It had an old axe head buried deep in the wood, rusted orange and dark brown. I'd been there before, passing through on other hunts for years. The whistle called out again. This time it seemed like the whistle was calling me, like I was someone's dog. I looked around but didn't see another soul in the woods. That's when I heard laughter, coming from the left of me. I turned my head and saw someone moving through the woods. I called out, thinking it was the local kids, telling them it wasn't going to work on me, that I wasn't a kid and I didn't believe in their fairy tales. I could hear the laughter again, and then I turned my head to the right. She stood there, next to a tree. She wore a dark dress, her skin was pale as ash, and the sockets of her eyes were dark. In fact, I couldn't even see her eyes. Her lips were pulled back away from her mouth like her skin was tight leather. She brought one finger up to her lips, and I could hear a shush escape from her mouth. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I just stood there. I almost laughed. I thought it was a kid in a costume at first, but when she moved, she didn't move her legs like she was walking. She seemed to glide through the grass. This caused something in my mind to break, and I turned around and ran back towards the cabin. I could hear whistling behind me and heavy breathing, like something was right behind, almost on top of me. It wasn't until I broke through the tree line back into my yard that I stopped hearing anything. I looked behind me, but I couldn't see anything. She wasn't there. I just stood there looking into the trees, probably looking like an idiot the whole time. After a few minutes, I went inside through the back door to the kitchen. I rested my rifle against the cabinets and splashed some water on my face. What was happening to me? I dried myself off with a towel and then froze. I could see her, standing in the trees. I could see her through the kitchen window. She stood there, staring at me, staring at the cabin. Then she whistled and vanished right in front of me, just disappeared. I couldn't believe what I just saw, what I just heard. I thought I was losing my mind. I got in my truck and drove into town. I found my wife and the kids there, and I just said, "We have to go now." They didn't understand what was wrong. When we got home, I told my spouse everything that had happened. She didn't believe me. She thought I was messing around with her. It wasn't until I reassured her that I wasn't, that she started to take me seriously. We put the cabin up for sale after the winter. It went immediately, as that area is becoming popular. However, that didn't last long. It has been 4 years, and it's exchanged hands 4 or 5 times now. No one wants it. The cabin has been sitting empty for months now. We've kept in touch with some of our old friends in the area, and they've kept us in the loop. Someone will take the place on, and then in a few weeks, or a month or two, they want nothing to do with it. We bought a new cabin in another area, one that the kids like better. They never really understood why we sold the old cabin, and I couldn't tell them either. I've never told anyone but my wife what really happened that day. This happened over 20 years ago in Delaware County, Pennsylvania. It was a pretty long time ago, so I might be a little fuzzy on some of the details. When I was around 10 or 11 years old, I didn't really have all that many friends, so I'd spend a lot of time at my cousin's house, who was a few years older than me. Despite the age gap, me and my cousin were close, and his mom treated me like another son. Plus, he had N64 and a flat-screen TV in his basement. I'd sleep over a lot. Sometimes in the summer, I'd spend the whole weekend. Usually it was just me and him doing dumb stuff or playing video games. But sometimes his friends from around the neighborhood would come hang out, and we'd all crash in the basement. I kind of idolized these kids. They were all older than me, but still treated me like I was one of their friends. They'd joke around all the time and come up with crazy things to do. Nothing dangerous, but stuff like egging houses or prank phone calls. I loved hanging out with them. This one time when a bunch of his friends came over, they all planned to spend the night. I'm not sure how it even came up, but we all decided to pull an all-nighter. Somehow it seemed like a great idea. So that's what we did. We ordered pizza at 10 p.m. and took turns playing Mario Kart 64 for hours, until like 2 a.m. 2 of the other kids eventually fell asleep, and naturally they had you-know-whats drawn all over their faces and hands dipped in cups of water to see if they'd pee themselves. Typical early 2000s teenage stuff. I was exhausted, but after seeing that, I recommitted to staying up all night. And I did. Around 5 a.m., everyone was awake at this point. The other 2 kids waking up after the vandalism. We all decided to take blankets out onto the front yard and hang out. It was summer, so it was warm, and my cousin lived in a very upscale neighborhood. The thought of something potentially bad happening never even crossed our minds. So there we all were, hanging out in the front yard with our blankets, laying in the grass and just shooting the shit. After a little while, the sun was starting to peek out and the guys were dropping off to sleep one by one. It was just me and my cousin talking for a little while, but eventually he surrendered too. Not only did I make it, but I was the last one. I was exhausted at this point, but for some reason, just couldn't fall asleep. I was staring up at the rising sun when I saw something move out of the corner of my eye. I turned my head to face it and was very confused about what I saw. It looked like a short little fuzzy bear walking on two legs. It had this weird kind of thick-looking white fur. I didn't see any eyes, so I couldn't tell if it was looking at me. It just stood in the middle of the road, I guess, facing my direction. I figured I was like hallucinating or something, so I rubbed my eyes, but when I opened them, it was still there. I didn't know what it was and really didn't think that anything that small could be dangerous, so I uncovered myself, stood up, and took a few steps towards it. As soon as I started walking its way, it did sort of a shuffle away from me. No turning its body around or anything, it just moved. I stopped, and it stopped. I started walking towards it again, and it shuffled away, so I just kept on walking after it. It was a summer Saturday morning, so nobody was about. No cars, no pedestrians on the road, just me and this little furball. It just kept walking up the road, and I just kept on following. After a few minutes, the thing cut off the road and into a thick patch of trees, and kept going. I stood on the road and watched its weird little body move into the woods, walk about 100 feet in, and just stop in some kind of clearing. Too curious at this point, I followed it in without hesitation. I walked maybe halfway towards the clearing when I stopped. I just remember feeling afraid, like really scared. I didn't know what, but it felt like I was doing something wrong or that I shouldn't be here. The thing just kept staring at me. I also noticed an awful kind of smell. It reminded me of the time when our refrigerator shorted out while we were away on vacation, and we came home to the smell of rancid meat throughout the house. I backed up a few paces, and when I did that, the thing shuffled towards me. I turned my back on it and started walking a little faster. I looked over my shoulder, and it wasn't doing a shuffling anymore. It was running full speed at me. I bolted right out of there. When I got back to the road, I kept running. I looked over my shoulder, and the thing was just gone. Vanished. I ran the few hundred yards back to my cousin's house, shook him awake and told him I wanted to go inside. Thankfully, he didn't ask any questions. He probably just figured I was tired and wanted to sleep on the couch. We woke the rest of the guys up and went into the basement. It took a while, but eventually I was able to fall back asleep until my dad came to get me later that afternoon. I never told anyone this story until now, and despite going to my cousin's house a bunch more times, I never saw the thing again, though I always stayed away from that patch of woods.